This is Bill Nell speaking. Allow me to begin by explaining a bit about myself and my work. I was a child in the early 1960s when I began to hear volunteer firemen at my local firehouse in East Meadow on Long Island in the New York area talk about seeing strange objects in the sky. Some told of similar stories they had heard from police officers and EMTs. These were credible people considered to be trained observers. Now, to me, all this seemed to go against what the U.S. government was claiming about UFO witnesses being untrained observers, seeing things that were quite ordinary in the sky that they just could not identify. In fact, during the 1960s blackout, which occurred in New York City, I was further impressed by accounts of UFO sightings reported by New York City policemen, firemen, and even celebrities. Actors Warren Beatty and Stuart Whitman both claimed to have seen strange disc-shaped objects glowing in the skies over the city during the time of the blackout. After several years of speaking to reliable UFO witnesses and reading a number of books on the subject, I started a UFO club in high school. This was supposed to be an after-school project for extra credit based on a subject of personal interest, much like a chess or math or even a science club. And I guess I expected that a couple of students besides myself might show up, but I was really astonished when over 150 people tried to crowd into a classroom meant for 50. Each person came with their own UFO story or encounter to share. I was even more shocked when one of the people who showed up actually turned out to be the school principal. Now, this guy was a tough ex-Marine, and he told us about seeing a strange object in the skies over Vietnam during 1967 when he was there. After trying to report it to his commanding officer, he was told not to bother. They already knew what it was, but never went into any more explanation. After high school, 2 years of military service in the Marine Corps, 2 years of college, and continued part-time investigation into paranormal events, I turned my attention to the full-time investigation of UFOs and the paranormal funded by speaking engagements that I did at libraries, universities, and private events. I still continue to do these. I have personally investigated thousands of paranormal events in 48 U.S. states and most of Canada. To date, I've presented over 1,500 seminars on the paranormal. During the late 1980s, I hosted a cable TV show about the paranormal, sponsored by Time Life Books. I've also produced a number of popular videos about the paranormal, and I was consultant to the popular UFO video documentary, UFOs: The Hidden Truth. You might have read about me in Omni, The New Yorker, Fate, and thousands of other publications throughout the world, and I've appeared on CNN, Headline News, NBC Nightly News, Hard Copy, A Current Affair, and hundreds of other spots that I did on television programs as well as radio shows. I've written a number of articles about the paranormal, and I've been a consultant to the films Independence Day, Men in Black, and Fire in the Sky. But in reality, not much of that really matters. What does matter is that I'm a guy who really loves true stories about the paranormal and enjoys sharing them with others. So let's get started. In July of 1952, a number of UFOs were seen over military installations around Washington, D.C. and the Capitol building itself. Despite the fact that these unknowns were described as solid objects under intelligent control by radar operators who tracked them and military pilots who chased them, an official government spokesperson later said that what everybody saw and photographed was merely a phenomenon known as swamp gas. Despite the fact that swamp gas almost exclusively occurs further south in states like Georgia and Florida during mild October weather, the explanation for these objects seen in July over Washington, D.C. was accepted for the most part by the news media and the public. But not everyone was satisfied. This event capped several others that occurred over a 10-year period, and in each case the government was able to explain away what might otherwise have been considered extraterrestrial encounters. The big question is, why? Why would the government cover up information about UFOs? Most people wonder why the United States government would keep UFOs and the existence of aliens a secret. Well, there are many possible answers to that question, but I suspect that the main reason for keeping this secret is a military one. You'll find out why as we move through this presentation. For now, let's jump back about 10 years to 1942. World War II was the first war in history that was probably fought as much in the air as it was on the ground. Thousands of Allied and enemy aircraft filled the skies. When they did, pilots on both sides began to report strange phenomena that seemed to defy explanation. The first reports came from American pilots serving in Europe and the South Pacific. They described seeing what appeared to be orange and white globes of light and disc-shaped objects that appeared near their aircraft. These things moved at incredible speeds and always acted as if they were under intelligent control. While the origin of the term is unclear, the American pilots called them Foo Fighters. It was either because they believed them to be somehow connected to the Japanese, or it might have been a play on the French word for fire. The term was usually spelled F-O-O, while the French word would have been correctly spelled F-E-U. The same phenomenon was seen on both sides of the conflict during World War II. This photograph shows an object following a Japanese aircraft. The Japanese thought that these were secret American observation devices. The Americans thought them to be secret devices used by the Japanese and possibly built by the Germans. The Germans were certain that these were spy craft built by the Americans or British. It was only after the war that all the parties involved realized that there was going to be no easy explanation for the Foo Fighters. My father served on the staff of General MacArthur during World War II. My father was a United States Army Air Force officer. MacArthur was the supreme commander of all Allied forces in the South Pacific. After receiving word about thousands of incidents of pilots reporting Foo Fighters, he ordered a study of the sightings and those who were reporting them. In the end, the report was over 10,000 pages long, was completed in 1946 after the war had ended, and still remains classified today. My father told me that the gist of the study concluded that all of the objects were probably not any flown by the enemy, and that most of the pilot witnesses were credible. All this may have led to a statement by MacArthur made in the 1950s, in which he said that the next full-scale war would not be an international conflict, but an intergalactic one. Military and civilian pilots remain the most credible UFO witnesses because being able to identify what's in the air around them can often mean the difference between life and death. One of the most controversial cases, and one which has still caused a wide split between government authorities and civilian pilots today, occurred in 1996. On August 9th, a Swissair Boeing 747 jetliner took off from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, bound for Logan Airport in Boston, Massachusetts. This was the first leg of its transatlantic flight to Zurich. While flying at 23,000 feet in a northeasterly direction, about 10 miles south of New York City's Staten Island, the Swissair 747 was suddenly bypassed by a UFO. According to the French press agency, a white object passed within 150 feet of the Boeing 747. Flying at high speed in the opposite direction and to the southeast, the object was clearly visible to the crew. The pilot said it was elongated, white, and without wings, although the co-pilot described it as rather round. Swissair spokesman Erwin Schaefer said, "Neither the pilot nor the co-pilot spoke of a missile." On Friday, September 26, Pat Caricio of the National Transportation Safety Board declared that the UFO was probably a weather balloon. Later the same day, the Federal Aviation Administration said the eerie object was merely a weather balloon. The FAA used statements from other pilots to confirm their belief that the object was a weather balloon. The problem is, the other pilots, a United Airlines crew, were not in any position to actually observe how or in which direction the object was moving. The case remains a sticking point to this day. Most pilots that decide to report a UFO sighting are routinely given some unpaid time off, sent to the FAA headquarters building for a few days, and shuffled from office to office, where interviewers drive home the point that UFO sightings can always be explained as either natural phenomenon or other aircraft.
Boston, good afternoon, Swissair 127 Heavy, final 230.
Swissair 127 Heavy, Boston, sir, good afternoon. Just verify you have the Norwich 2 arrivals, Boston.
Refund.
Roger.
Center is Swissair 127.
Swissair 127, go ahead.
Yes, sir. I don't know what it was, but it just overflew like a couple of hundred feet above us. It was I don't know if it was a rocket or whatever, but incredibly fast, opposite direction.
In the opposite direction?
Yes, sir. And the time was, 2107. It was too fast to be an airplane.
Okay, thank you. Yes, sir, 986 Boston Center. The center maintain flight level 180.
Down to 180, yes, sir. 986.
Yes, sir, 986. You see anything like a missile in your area, perhaps off to your right?
Take a good look, but I don't think, if it's going that fast, I probably won't get a chance. We just saw Swissair go by a little bit ago.
Okay, thanks.
One of the greatest misconceptions about UFO sightings is that they always occur in rural areas. On February 25, 1942, this object appeared over Los Angeles, California. Thinking it was an enemy bomber or observation aircraft, searchlights were trained on the object, and Army aircraft scrambled to attack and bring it down. But according to various witnesses on the ground, the plane seemed unable to get close to the object. Instead, they flew away and ground batteries began their attack. Despite shooting over 10,000 rounds of ammo at the unknown, they were unable to shoot it down. A close look at the photo reveals the ammo, or flak, exploding all around the object. Despite the ferocious attack, the unknown just sat there, never shot back, until a point in which it simply vanished. The extent of the attack was apparent the next day, when civilians discovered huge amounts of debris from the exploded ammo that had drifted to Earth throughout the Los Angeles area. Newspapers carried front-page accounts about it. Meanwhile, the Army admitted the alarm was real and that something had been in the skies over Los Angeles, but they weren't sure what it was. In an effort to keep the inability to successfully attack the object and shoot it down a secret, they refused to admit that attack aircraft were ever sent up to try to bring it down. Although it may not be a daily occurrence, UFOs are seen and sometimes filmed over large cities. On August 6, 1997, a UFO seen by multiple witnesses over Mexico City was caught on tape by one of the witnesses who used a Sony digital camera. It's ironic that many dispute the validity of this video. Even when UFOs are seen by thousands of people and caught on tape by independent photographers, we've been so programmed by government authorities and skeptical scientists to believe aliens would just not visit the Earth that many of us just can't believe it when one does. One of the things that really shocked the Allied forces during World War II was the technology possessed by the Germans. The V-2 rocket, basically a 1940s version of most any modern intercontinental ballistic missile, was at least 30 years ahead of what every other government had available. German aircraft were the first to use swept-wing technology, despite the fact that we're told such aircraft cannot fly in a stable manner without computers, which did not exist in a form that could be placed aboard aircraft in the 1940s. According to the U.S. Army's official history of World War II, some German planes even used television and radar-guided weapons. The Germans were the first to fly jets and the only ones to use them during World War II. Some were made of exotic composite materials, carefully held in place by special radar-absorbing glue. America's B-2 stealth bomber bears a striking resemblance to some of the German jets of World War II and is assembled in much the same way. But those jets were assembled and flown in the 1940s. The question is, how did Germany, which had been forced to disarm after World War I, develop so much technology in such a short period of time? The answer is, they may have had help. German plans for saucer-shaped craft found and examined after World War II by the Allied intelligence services suggest that the Germans may have had access to one or more crashed UFOs which had gone down somewhere in Germany at a much earlier date. The circular craft, which Germany never had time to actually produce that we know of, would have been powered by a sophisticated gravity drive using powerful magnetic fields. Was Germany able to glean enough technology from crashed UFOs to jump ahead of the rest of the world in electronics, engineering, and weaponry? Considering the fact that the United States spent the next 30 years after World War II ended relearning and copying what Germany already knew in terms of technology, the answer might just be yes. President Harry S. Truman was a skeptical man, often described as being as stubborn as a Missouri mule. No less so was Frank Edwards, a popular and powerful syndicated news reporter. The two were casual friends, but both would forever become connected to the subject of UFOs because of events that occurred in the year 1947. It was in 1947 that Truman signed the National Security Act while aboard his presidential aircraft, the Sacred Cow. That act ultimately established the CIA, Department of Defense, United States Air Force, and the National Security Council. Some believe that Truman also created a special study group of scientists, military leaders, and civilians known as MJ or Majestic 12. These 12 people were supposed to study the subject of UFOs based on evidence not shown to the public and make recommendations to the president and military on how to deal with the phenomenon. While the National Security Act and MJ-12 gave the government new tools needed to secretly handle what they considered to be the UFO problem, they also quietly removed the right of the public to know about them. For a reporter like Frank Edwards, the right of the public to know everything was paramount. Perhaps that's why that in 1947, after these events and other UFO sightings and crashes which occurred, when he saw the secrecy that surrounded all this, Frank Edwards moved the direction of his reporting from mainline news to covering the world of the paranormal. Regarding MJ-12, a lot of people wonder if the MJ-12 documents which have surfaced since that time are real. I'll answer that question in this way. As far as the UFO research community is concerned, I would say that the vast majority of researchers consider at least one or all of the documents to be fakes. These opinions were reached after a careful examination of the documents signed by President Truman. The results showed that his signature was a copy of the same signature from another totally unrelated document. But at the same time, many of the people mentioned in these documents have unusual connections to UFOs. For example, Vice Admiral Roscoe Hillenkotter, once the alleged head of MJ-12, wrote an autobiography that was never published. For some unknown reason, I discovered that it had been locked up in the archives of the American Museum of Natural History in New York City. Once on that trail, I further discovered that during the latter part of World War II, and before the creation of the Central Identification Laboratory by the U.S. government in Hawaii in 1947, several anthropologists at the Museum of Natural History had been involved in the identification of human remains for the military. While they were working at the Brooklyn Navy Yard in a makeshift morgue, these scientists and anthropologists developed the process of rebuilding human faces around skulls using clay. This made it far simpler to identify remains using photos in a day long before DNA testing had been invented. Now, while snooping around and interviewing older employees that worked at the museum, I also discovered a popular rumor that these same anthropologists had been involved in the reconstruction of dead alien bodies after one or more UFO crashes in the late 1940s and early 1950s. But the thing that really tied it all together was the name of one of the museum's former directors. It was Morris K. Jessup Sr. Morris K. Jessup Jr. wrote a book in the 1950s called The Case for the UFOs, which claimed to expose, among other things, the secrets of UFO technology. MJ-12 was and still is a designation for hardware connected to black projects at the Pentagon and found in various non-classified technical manuals. Some of that hardware is designed by a Long Island, New York Technology Institute started by, guess who, Vice Admiral Roscoe Hillenkotter. If the documents are fake, they were probably placed out in the UFO community to draw attention away from the real MJ-12 in order to discredit its existence. If you want an idea of the level of government information about UFOs, just imagine one guy sitting around a computer all day working on fake ideas, stories, and evidence. Now multiply that person by 10,000 others, and you're pretty much there. On June 24, 1947, a former military pilot and highly respected community leader named Kenneth Arnold was flying from Chehalis to Yakima, Washington State, when he noticed 9 objects moving at a terrific speed near Mount Rainier, moving at over 1,200 miles an hour in a motion that he described as stones skipping across the water. The objects were different from any others he had ever seen before. Arnold's sighting capped off a number of other UFO reports from various parts of the country, but his credibility as a former military pilot, air search and rescue volunteer, and community leader made the news media and the public start to consider the possibility that these strange objects were more than just the result of overactive imaginations. When asked to describe the objects, Arnold said that they flipped and flashed in front of his eyes and were saucer or disc-shaped objects. The news media picked up on his description, and the term flying saucer was born. When the U.S. Air Force started to investigate these reports, they decided that a more serious and military-sounding term was needed, so they called them UFOs, or unidentified flying objects.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army. Army officers say the missile, found sometime last week, has been inspected at Roswell, New Mexico, and sent to Wright Field, Ohio, for further inspection.
With the nation already worked up to a fever pitch about the flying saucer topic by the Arnold sighting and others now being reported around the world, it was less than 2 weeks later when the Air Force stunned the nation by reporting that a flying saucer had crash-landed on a ranch near Roswell, New Mexico. The press release went on to say that the object had been recovered, taken to the Roswell Army Air Force Base, and moved on to other locations for further study. Meanwhile, witnesses like the Wilmot family came forward. They were sitting on their front porch at 105 South Pennsylvania at about 10 o'clock at night when a large glowing object zoomed out of the sky from the southeast, going in a northwesterly direction at a high rate of speed. They went into their yard for a better look and watched the thing for about 40 to 50 seconds, reporting it to be about 1,500 feet above them and moving at around 400 to 500 miles per hour. The object crashed on the Brazel Ranch on July 4, 1947. Mac Brazel reported the situation to Sheriff Wilcox a few days later after driving into town and showing a few pieces of strange material from the crash to friends and family. Sheriff Wilcox contacted the Roswell Army Air Force Base. According to a press release they put out that was dated July 8, 1947, Major Jesse Marcel was dispatched to the scene to investigate. He was the base intelligence officer, but also a physicist. Marcel found material that he described as being like the foil from a cigarette wrapper. When he tried to misshape it, it returned to the original shape. Likewise, it could not be burned and seemed impervious to further destruction. Despite witness accounts of a fast-moving object, the strange material, an assessment by Marcel that it was not of this world, and the military's own admission that it was disc-shaped, a new press release was offered on July 9, 1947, by the Roswell base, which stated that the object was not a flying disc at all, but merely a weather balloon. In what seemed like an attempt to keep the national press as far away from Roswell as possible, a press conference was held in Fort Worth, Texas, by General Ramey, commander of the 8th Air Forces. The idea was to have Major Marcel and General Ramey display a balloon as the explanation for the wreckage found on the Brazel Ranch. The problem was a number of people in Roswell, and possibly a few journalists who had made it into the area, had already seen what some of the smaller pieces of the real wreckage looked like. To make sure that everyone went along with the government explanation, actual pieces of the saucer wreckage was mixed in with spurious material from the balloon. This allowed for plausible denial, as townspeople from Roswell recognized enough of the real material to allow the balloon theory to be accepted. An interesting side note to all this is that for years, most other researchers laughed at the idea of the real material being mixed in with spurious balloon wreckage, despite the fact that what my research showed indicated that that was the case. But recently, a new photographic technique allowed for close examination of the material and indicated that some strange symbols were seen on some of it, symbols that wouldn't be found on any military balloon. The real wreckage in the photo is a lighter-colored, smooth-looking material lying on top of the balloon wreckage near the bottom of the photo. Among the witnesses who have come forward to dispute the official story are former base information officer Walter Haupt and funeral worker Glenn Dennis. Acting on orders from the base commander, Haupt distributed the first press release. He knew Major Marcel very well and felt that Jesse had been made a scapegoat. As far as Haupt was concerned, if Marcel, who was a physicist, not just another government hack like Ramey, said it was an alien spacecraft, then that's what it was. Glenn Dennis was working at a funeral home in Roswell that had a contract with the base as far as providing funeral and burial services when he got a call from the Roswell base. They wanted to know if he had a certain number of child-sized coffins on hand. He had a few, but not the amount requested, and said that he would bring what he had to the base. Once there, Dennis saw that everyone was upset and running around. He entered the base hospital where his girlfriend worked but she told him to leave immediately. On his way out, he was stopped by military police who asked if he had seen anything. He said no, but they told him if he revealed anything about what he saw or heard at the base that night, they would find his body in the desert the next day. It was not exactly a veiled threat.